Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the next installment of Digging Through Discographies. Now we're on the fifth album of Linkin Park, and I really hope that you've been enjoying this so far, strolling down memory lane with all these albums. I know I have. I've been able to learn a lot about this band and compare and contrast a lot of ideas, and I like seeing the progression of this band as well as get to see some of the ideas of why they picked certain styles that they want to go with. I think it's a really cool idea to be able to dive through this, and I hope that you have as well. Now, just to retread through a couple different things, we've already talked about four albums, which are Hybrid Theory, Meteora, Minutes to Midnight, and A Thousand Suns. Of course, the monumental first two, the more rock-centric Minutes to Midnight, and the concept album of A Thousand Suns. And now we are at a crossroads because this particular album, A Thousand Suns, was pretty much panned in between two groups for how people felt about this album. There were the people who really liked the concept, really enjoyed the ideas that they were going with, and just liked the journey that they went on for A Thousand Suns. And then there was the people who were yearning for the old Linkin Park and was wondering where the aggression was and where the new metal was and all these things. So how do you get to the fans on this? Like, where do you go from here? So the first thing that they do is they start writing new material for a new album. And this particular album was recorded from March 2011 to April 2012. They also toured a little bit during this particular album as well. But that was basically it in terms of the stuff that was going on at the time. Again, this album was co-produced with Shinoda and Rick Rubin, and nothing really changed in terms of instrumentation or the process itself. So there isn't a lot to talk about with that stuff. So instead, I want to talk about the music and the lyrics, and this is where things get a little bit interesting. As Bennington and Shinoda state, they basically were looking to take elements of all four albums and try to create something truly unique and truly interesting. Bennington and Shinoda were interviewed about this, and here's a couple of things that they said. So with Bennington, they were saying, with this new album, we've incorporated a lot of guitar work with big choruses and the heavier electronic stuff to give it that really big wall of sound feeling without getting too metal. This will be more familiar to people than A Thousand Suns was, where we were like, fuck it, we're just going to go bonkers. Shinoda mirrored that sentiment, saying, we now know we have these skills and these tools to take those ideas and make them into what we're actually looking for, as opposed to getting into it and discovering that it just sounds really new metal. That's always going to be gross to us, but we can take elements of that and reinvent the vibe, make it new and fresh. So already right there, they're kind of saying to the people who are looking for that older sound, yeah, we're not necessarily going to do that. We don't want to go back to the new metal roots. We want to be able to take everything that we've learned and make something interesting from there, which I think is really cool to read from them, that they are understanding where they're coming from, but also are like, hey, we want to experiment more. So it does take a lot of these different ideas from all the albums. It is a little more rap-centric. They said it's a little bit more angelic and more song-structured based rather than the concept itself. So kind of broken down a little bit more and more simplified rather than a full entire concept. The lyrics themselves were also more simplified, as Where the Living Things name comes from, where they're talking about more about people and relationships and everything like that, like the simple human connective ideas rather than a political idea. So that's where the music and the lyrics come in. But they also did take a couple of other influences on this album. There are some folk rock songs, kind of ish, on this album with Roads Untraveled, Skin to Bone, and Castle Glass. And they also have some punk rock influences on the song Victimize, and they do try to explore some other genres as well. So this album was dropped on June 20th of 2012, and they had 4 singles. The first one, and the only one before the album, being Burn It Down, which was released on April 16th, 2012, but there was also Lost in the Echo that was dropped on October 19th, 2012, Perilous on October 31st, 2012, and Castle Glass on December 7th, 2012. So, with all that in mind, with the idea of this album being a conglomerate of ideas from all 4 albums, where does this stand? Well, I personally think that this does have a lot more influences of Meteor and Hybrid Theory with the electronic feel of A Thousand Suns. Though I will also say that the anger and the raw power on a lot of these songs don't hit the same high energy parts of Meteora and Hybrid Theory. There is a lot more times where there's a lot more rapping on this album, and it seems like there's a lot of collab stuff on this album, kind of like Meteora. So, for example, in terms of Shinoda and Bennington working together, we have Lost in the Echo, where Shinoda's rapping on the verses and Bennington singing on the choruses. Burn It Down is mostly a Bennington song, but Shinoda does do his own little rap part. Lies, Greed, Misery, Shinoda's doing raps on the verses, and Bennington is singing on the choruses. Victimize, Shinoda's on the first verse, and he's also rapping on the second verse, and Bennington sings on the chorus. Till It Breaks features mostly Shinoda, but Bennington is on one little bridge part, and actually Delson sings the final part of that song. And then mostly everything else is either a Bennington staple or a Bennington with Shinoda also singing. So Bennington by himself is on Powerless. He is on... Actually, that's basically it. Actually, I'll Be Gone is also one that's just by himself. Everything else, and this is where kind of this Minutes to Midnight and kind of this A Thousand Suns qualities come in, is Shinoda actually singing on a lot of this stuff, as opposed to stuff on Hybrid Theory and Meteora. So In My Remains, it's mostly a Bennington song, but Shinoda sings on the bridge part. Castle Glass, both Shinoda and Bennington sing on that song. Roads Untraveled has both Bennington and Shinoda singing at parts. Skin to Bone is the same thing. And the only song that I haven't talked about is Tinfoil, which is honestly just an instrumental going from Until It Breaks to Powerless. So it's a nice collab, and actually this is the first time where Bennington isn't actually the main feature in terms of the band, and I like that, because Shinoda, it gets to show where Shinoda gets to show off his voice as well. I mean, he has some pretty good parts. Roads Untraveled, Skin to Bone, and Castle Glass standing out in terms of his vocals, where his low register sounds very nice, contrasting with Bennington. And Shinoda also has some really good raps on this particular album. My favorite being Lost in the Echo. It's one of his best raps, in my opinion, in terms of the flow and also the imagery. It kind of reminds me of High Voltage in terms of the imagery, and I really like that. I will say some of the other ones aren't as good, but I still do like some of the stuff. Like Lies, Greed, Misery isn't the best, but it's all right. Victimize, I like his rapping on there. I just wish there was a little bit more. I do appreciate his rapping on Until It Breaks, and I honestly think that his rapping on Burn It Down is kind of lackluster, just because he has a very small part and he repeats it. But he gets to shine on this album a lot, and that's not saying that Bennington doesn't do well either. There's a lot of good stuff on there in terms of his vocals. In My Remains, great on there. He's good on Castle Glass, I'll Be Gone, Burn It Down. Like, most of the songs he sounds good, and he even gets to show off his low register as well on Roads Untraveled, Castle Glass, Skin to Bone, even Powerless. Powerless has some of his best vocals on here. And he also screams a lot more, bringing back some of this ideas from Hybrid Theory and Meteora, like Lost in the Echo, Lies, Greed, and Misery, Victimize. He also does it on. So it's cool to see a little bit of mixture of everything. And now, in terms of the album itself and the music, there's some really good songs on here. I really like Lost in the Echo. I like the feel of that. I like the layering of the electronics, where there's this very staccato, like um, electronic part mixed with some electronic drums, and these beats work very well with each other. I like the play of Bennington and Shinoda on this song. Um, I really like some of the more interesting arranging ones. Going with Castle of Glass, I really like the folky electronic feel of that song. I like how it builds. I like the harmonies on there. I really like Roads Untraveled. I like the simplicity of the piano chords and these like chimey bell parts that let the lyrics have their shine. Um, some of the other ones that I really like, Powerless, I like the feel of it. I think it's a really good closer. I like the idea of that they have these measures of 14 beats, and it goes between 6/8 and then 8/8, or like 6 beats and then 8 beats. I really like the idea in the verse. It's the first time that they've really like played with time in that kind of way, and I really like that. Though, again, not the strongest song on the album, but I really like that particular feel. Burn It Down, not my favorite, but it is a very catchy single, and it's cool that they wrote it as, for basically being a single, it's really good. But I don't, in terms of a Linkin Park song, I don't think it's one of their strongest. I think it's the problem that I have with it is it's very oversimplistic just to be a single. The lyrics are oversimplistic. The instrumentation is very simplistic, and even the rap part's very simplistic. But it's a pretty good single, and that's what I appreciate about it. In My Remains feels a lot like One Step Closer in the sense of like how Paper Cut was on Hybrid Theory, and then it was One Step Closer. Kind of same way with Lost in the Echo and In My Remains. Lost in the Echo being the more upbeat, more one where it's showing off Shinoda and then also showing off Bennington. But In My Remains basically being a Bennington song. But I think with the time that they've had as a band, it shows how much they've progressed, because I think In My Remains is a stronger song. I like that it actually shows off Shinoda as well on there. I think the instrumentation is more interesting. I think the chords are more powerful. Even if it doesn't have that particular growl or angst or anger on that particular song, I think it's a better made song. And that's basically it for like the highlights for me. Not saying that the other ones aren't bad. I just think some of them are kind of a misstep. I'll Be Gone, not bad, just not really memorable. Skin the Bone, another not bad song. It's an interesting arrangement, but I think the song is oversimplistic for its own good, especially because the chorus itself, I mean, the verse and the chorus aren't that long, which makes it very repetitive, and then it gets it to almost be a little bit bland. I do like the sound of it. I just think that it could have built a little bit better. I think that in terms of simplicity, Roads Untraveled did a little bit better. And that's actually something interesting to me, is that some of these songs have very simplistic melodies, kind of like very bare bones, kind of like nursery rhyme melodies, if you will. Skin the Bone being that way, Roads Untraveled, the first part of Victimize, even Castle of Glass kind of has that a little bit. And one of the parts on Until It Breaks has that kind of simplistic nature, which is very weird to me. It's not something I've noticed ever on any other songs or other albums of Linkin Park, and it just stands out to me in terms of this. The other ones, Victimize, not a bad song. Punk rock, really cool idea of the punk rock electric idea, but I just wish it was a little bit longer. And because it's only like a minute 40 or something like that, I think it could have been a little bit longer and more fleshed out. It could have been a better song. Lies, Greed, Misery, same thing. Not a horrible song. I think it has one of the worst choruses on this album. Like I said, Shinoda's rapping isn't the best on this one, but I think it's an interesting idea. Though I feel like also the music and the vibe doesn't mesh fully. The one place where that like shows off to me is the part where it's You Did It to Yourself, and it's Bennington first having these like electronic vocals, and it's very calm, and then all of a sudden he starts screaming like in One Step Closer, but it just doesn't ever work, and the build doesn't work enough in order for that to warrant what it did. I think the biggest faux pas on this CD though is Until It Breaks. It was supposed to be 3 different songs, and definitely shows, because there's a Delson part, there's a Bennington part, and there's a Shinoda part, and the Shinoda part changes throughout it, and I don't think that it ever meshes very well, and it kind of is a detriment to Shinoda, because his rap's good, but the music behind it never works, and if it was just a straight up Shinoda song, I think it would have been better. I feel like the Delson part shouldn't have been in there. I don't think the Bennington part should have been in there, because it doesn't really bring much to that song. And that's like the one biggest faux pas on this album. And Tinfoil, like I said, it's just a throw in as a transition between Until It Breaks and Powerless. So there's some very interesting songs on here, and there's some like very imaginative, very risk-taking songs like Castle of Glass, like Roads Untraveled, that stand out. But for the most part, I think the latter parts are either just a little bit not as memorable, or a little bit too simplistic, or just are a hit and or a miss in terms of experimentation. But I do appreciate it much more than I did in the past. I've really hated it when it came out. I was like, okay, this is kind of where I was going in terms of like bringing it back to the past, but I felt like the electronics it took away from the sound that I was looking for. I really loved the song Less Than the Echo, though. I always have. And I was just mad that the rest of the album didn't follow suit. But now I see that there's a lot more experimentation, and this kind of feels like in the same way as Meteor in terms of experimentation, where they were trying something new, and it didn't all work out as much as Meteor did. But I appreciate how they experimented, and it was cool to see where they went, even if all of it didn't work. For this particular album, if you like the more electronic sound of Linkin Park, like 1,000 Suns, I don't think you would mind this, because it does have a lot of that electronic sound, but a little bit more of the angst of Meteor and Hybrid Theory without ever reaching that level. But a lot of experimentation, a lot of electric, a lot of catchy songs, a lot of simplistic ideas. If you are for that, by all means, give it a listen. I think it's a pretty good album, though we'll see where exactly it lands on my list. But before I do that, I just need to talk about how this particular album fared. So this album sold 223,000 copies during its debut week, ranking #1 on the U.S. albums chart, being out Maroon 5's Overexposed by 1,000 copies. And if you heard my Are You In from last week, you can tell how much I am excited to have read that, because I don't think Overexposed is a pretty good album at all. It did fell to #5 on the second week, only selling 64,000 copies in that week, though it did chart #1 in 17 other countries, which is pretty cool. 3 of the 4 singles charted. Burn It Down hit #1 on both the U.S. alt and mainstream rock charts, and peaked at #30 on the Billboard Hot 100. Lost in the Echo peaked at #7 on the mainstream rock chart, #12 on the alt rock chart, and #95 on the Billboard Hot 100. Castle of Glass only charted on the alt rock chart at #16. Powerless did not chart at all. The album sold 2.5 million copies worldwide as of December 2013, so that's probably a little bit higher by now. But it was also certified platinum in the U.S. in August of 2017. In terms of awards, that actually didn't really get nominated for much. The only thing is Castle of Glass was nominated for Best Song in a Game at the 2012 Spike Video Game Awards, but lost to Cities by Beck. So as you can see, the downward trend in terms of sales and in terms of accolades is still there. And then, honestly, not much else to talk about, though I do want to bring up a little bit of extra stuff. So after this album came out, they worked on a song with Steve Aoki entitled "A Light That Never Comes" for the Linkin Park's online puzzle action game LP Recharge, which was launched on September 12, 2013. And that song was also the lead single for the remix album that they did called Recharged, which dropped on October 29, 2013. It was very similar to in times of idea of reanimation, where they took just all the songs from Living Things and recharged it, and they had collabs from people like Pusha T and Money Mark and Rick Rubin. Now, don't listen to this album. I listened to it, and maybe I had to listen to it again, but when it came out, I wanted to give it a chance because I was like, maybe they took Living Things and made it more interesting. A Light That Never Comes is an amazing song. I really, really like that one. I like the collab, and I think it's really interesting. Then every other song falls flat. It was such a waste of time for me. In terms of a remix album, don't listen at all. At least that's my opinion. They also did work on a soundtrack for the film Mall, was directed by Joe Hand, the turntable guy. And that's basically it before they get to the sixth album. I also want to say real quick, I've also talked about their videos. This particular album has amazing videos, just like also in 1,000 Suns. Some really, really cool videos. Burn It Down's really cool. Castle of Glass is a really cool one. Powerless has some pretty cool vibes as well. This band has always been good with music videos, but also this particular artwork for the album is one of my favorite by them. It's really cool, and if you ever see some of their like audio videos, or it's just the audio and their 360 like imagery stuff, it's really cool. It's really cool to watch. I would say I'm going to put a playlist for this album up afterwards, and you should definitely check out some of those ones because they're really cool. So yeah, that's where we stand now. In terms of this album, where does it rank in my in the rankings themselves? I do think this is better than Minutes to Midnight. I think it has a lot more interesting ideas on there, and I think most of the singles are better than the ones from Minutes to Midnight. I don't think it touches Hybrid Theory. I don't think it touches Meteora. I don't think it touches either of them. So the question is it better than 1,000 Suns to me? It's a toss-up. I've been trying to debate this throughout the whole entire week when I've been thinking about this. I would say no. I think it's almost as good as 1,000 Suns, but I think the concept is more interesting. I think there's a lot more songs I would go to from 1,000 Suns before I would go to Living Things. But I don't think Living Things is a bad album at all. I think it's a good album. I don't think it's a great album. I think there's a lot of good songs on there, and I think there's a lot of interesting ideas, and I really like how this band was able to take a lot of their ideas from other albums and put it together. It's really cool. It's just, it doesn't hit the highs of some of the other ones. So if you can now see on the screen, we have the list going down, and it's number 5, Minutes to Midnight, number 4, Living Things, number 3, 1,000 Suns, number 2, Hybrid Theory, and number 1, Meteora. Now we have 2 other albums to talk about, but right before I end this, I will say that this is the last album that Rick Rubin works with the group. So we'll have to see how that changes the last 2 albums. But we'll have to find out next week for that. Until then, if you like this, of course, a couple of different things. Like the video, comment on what you think about Living Things, share with your friends, subscribe to my channel, and just keep watching my videos. Now I have basically all my stuff ready for the rest of the weekend, and I have Saturday night to record it. So this is coming out tonight. Saturday I'll do a cover song, and then Sunday I will have, and I promise, my next Are You In? So until then, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.